And welcome everyone. I think we're about to start this afternoon's webinar. We'll be discussing cloud cost control. My name is Liam Bennett. I'm the Cloud Practice Director here at Claranet.
I'm Sandy Simcox. I head up the cloud portfolio here at Claranet.
Now, just a few bits of housekeeping before we move on. This is a 30-minute session. We'll have some time at the end for Q&A as well. If there are any recording or sound issues throughout, then we are making a recording of this that will be available later. Also, if you see from the right-hand side, there are a number of handouts that go with this webinar. I suggest you download them early and review those as we go through, as they won't be available after we close this webinar. If you have any questions, there is also the chat section. We'll come to the questions at the end, but feel free throughout to post your questions in there, and we'll do our best to get through them. Okay, so to start with, we're going to kick off nice and smoothly with a poll, just to make sure that you are all there and you're all awake. So to start things off, where are you all on your cloud journey? Have you not started at all? Are you evaluating? Are you building a business case? Do you not know where you want to go? Do you need some help with that? Are you dipping your toe in the water, running some dev test workloads, experimenting with how it's going to work for you, what the associated costs are going to look like with your migration? Or are you fully in production? Are you fully there? You know what you're doing. You're just looking to optimize your current spend, make the most of the investment that you're making. Oh, great. That is a good set of results there. So most of you are running multiple production workloads. There's a few of you there that are just getting started, but most of you are running multiple production workloads. That's really good. So we're looking like we're speaking mostly to a fairly experienced audience. So I'll take that in mind. So moving on to a kind of introduction to where we are. Sandy, do you want to kick that off?
Yeah, I think Liam and I are both very chuffed that you're all managing a lot of stuff. When we were pulling the content together for this, we were trying to make sure that we kind of ticked everyone's boxes, but it is aimed at people that have got a lot more experience in cloud. So we'll touch on some other things, and if there's anything that we don't cover, again, there's a question section, so everyone's welcome to ask any questions, and we'll look at them at the end. I'm taking part in this webinar. I'm not particularly technical myself, but I'm taking part in this webinar because I look at the function that decides what products it is our customers really want and need, and tries to make sense of them and create something that will be able to deliver really effectively and that will actually bring the value that our customers are looking for. So I actually did a lot of research going into pulling our FinOps offering together. I spoke to a lot of our customers that were requesting that we do ad hoc financial optimization stuff, or they were trying to DIY it themselves, or they were looking at third-party tooling, and tried to get a really good understanding of where the gaps are, what was working, what wasn't working, why was it they were looking at it, what were their priorities. One of the biggest learnings that came out of it for me was the fact that there's a lot of talk about FinOps, and actually people can sometimes miss out a lot of the other stuff that's important. So we wanted to make sure that this webinar was all about cloud cost control holistically. We're not just going to talk about FinOps. I think that's a really important part of it, but in order to make sure that you get your costs down and actually keep them down, it's not about just buying a few RIs. You need to look at everything else, and you need to make sure that whatever it is you're doing fits across your organization and isn't just suited to one team or one person. I've included on the slide a few examples of the types of things that we include. So we'd look at things like resource tagging to make sure that all of your reporting and your dashboards and everything are accurate, whether or not you need sort of reporting time and place reports, or whether or not you actually need some kind of dashboard that you can go and look at whenever it is that you need it. Things like utilization of RIs and spot instances, so making sure that you're actually using all of the stuff that you paid for. We found a lot of customers were doing the work of getting RIs, but then they'd get to the end of the year and find that they hadn't actually used a lot of them, and it was wasted money. The impact of budgeting and how that hits people across the business. And then the last one on here is policies. And I guess the best way to use policies to make sure that you're not putting too many restrictions on your developers, but you're actually able to get all of the information that you need when it comes to any reporting and budgeting activities that you want to do.
So effective cost control, I think some of these points you will resonate with many of you on the call. The first, I'll go through each of these, but the first one of right sizing and auto scaling, this is a fairly common first step. Pay for what you use, pay for only what you use. Right sizing, going against the traditional grain of making sure that the machines and the infrastructure that you have provisioned is running to maximal utilization. 80-90% utilization is a good position to be in, as long as you've got the auto scaling that goes with it, so that you're making actually effective use of all of that power that you have in front of you. You're not oversizing, you're not undersizing, you're getting it absolutely spot on. I call it out here for the more advanced user amongst you, that is something to still pay attention to, even if this is something that you do have, still pay attention to it, because it is where you're going to lose some money by oversizing. Dynamic dev environments is something that we've worked with a number of customers on. We still see today a lot of customers deploying large pre-production environments, dev, test, UAT, and so on, for as shared infrastructure that sit there running 24/7 commonly. Even if it's in business hours, it still sits there for a large portion of time. One technique that we're starting to see roll out with customers is to have application or team specific environments that are dedicated to them. They have their own cadence, they have their own sizing necessary. They will turn off and on and off in different schedules. And there can be a lot of money saved there by making sure that you're not, shared infrastructure should only be shared infrastructure when it is actually shared. If you can get away with not having it that way, then you're going to save some money there. The big topic in the middle there, as Sandy initially pointed out, is reservations. So this is where we're talking about, the example that we have here is Funky Pigeon, where we saved them 40% of their overall cost by purchasing 1-year reservations for them. This is the big ticket item. It's the area where most FinOps assessments will focus. It isn't the be all and end all. There are a lot of costs that aren't covered by reservations that you need to manage, and there are also a lot of advanced things to look at, which I'll come on to later, when you look at your reservation utilization, your reservation purchasing strategy as well. Resource lifecycle management really comes into play when you're looking at data. What data do you have in your environment? Do you need to, you might need to keep it for compliance reasons, but are you getting value from that data? Can you get more value from that data? And if you don't need to keep it, why are you keeping it? Do you have effective resource policies in place to get rid of resources that you don't need anymore? Are you not just turning off machines? Are you killing those machines so you're not getting any of that spend at all? Are you able to recreate some of your environments? The second to last point on governing multi-cloud spend. So governing multi-cloud spend is a tricky and a sometimes still niche area, where you need to really understand the technical detail of cost pricing for each cloud provider. This isn't a topic of comparing one cloud to another. It isn't a topic of transitioning workloads from one cloud to another, or any kind of arbitrage or anything of that nature. This is purely making sure that you have policies and governance in place that is similar and effective across all multi-cloud. And then bespoke reporting. So bespoke reporting is an area that is often underlooked. It is where you're looking at effectively, what data do you need to make decisions in your environment? How does that data differ from team to team, from manager to engineer to financial person? And making sure how you cut up that data. So do you care about resources? Do you care about specific accounts or environments? Do you care about specific applications that might span those things? Building up all of those reports can be quite a significant effort, and making sure that it's targeted to the right people is also critically important. Next slide, please. So what are the common mistakes that we see? Firstly is lack of visibility. Again, from bespoke reporting, it's not having the understanding of the wider application estate. We know historically that things like CMDBs have been notoriously painful to create and maintain over time. That situation hasn't changed. So being able to understand and allocate costs to specific applications, to specific teams, that still remains a problem today. And then not looking at all of the costs. So the point also there is only looking at virtual machines and reservations. What about the network costs, the egress costs? In hybrid environments, these can be really significant areas of cost, and not being able to attribute them cleanly to a cost center, to a team, to an application, and so on is a really difficult challenge, and an area that is often underlooked. Native tooling recommendations. So that is within the cloud platform, cost management tools within the platforms, third-party tooling. They will make recommendations based on all of the data that is ingested into them. However, they do not understand your business. They do not understand the applications. They don't understand the peaks of utilization, the change windows that you might have, the reason why some machines might be scaled slightly larger than the data would necessitate. So it's understanding that, yes, there are tools there that will provide you automated recommendations, but you need to layer in business context. So we see that commonly with some of the FinOps assessments that we've seen, that they just don't factor in those things, and it can lead to reservation purchases that aren't appropriate, that can lead to reservation underutilization in the long run. So it's about taking the data that you have, pooling it into one place, and making sensible decisions, using the tooling to drive investigation, to drive decision making, not using it to make the decisions for you. And then lack of engineering experience. So a lot of people that there is a mix of people that come from a cloud economics and a FinOps role, that have a mix of experience from the finance side, some from the engineering side, even some from project management and business and analysis. What we're seeing is a kind of a lack of engineering experience, of understanding the services to which cost is attributed, the services deployed, how they operate, what features that they have that can help with cost. So that lack of understanding is something that is why we see a lot of engagement as a partner. Only considering virtual machines and reservations is something I've mentioned already. That's going beyond reservations. And then poor reservation utilization. So when you've made purchases, particularly longer term reservations, where you've not factored in your wider roadmap, do you really need to purchase those longer instances? Where does that sit in the life cycle of your applications? And that is just wasted spend. Next slide, please.
So before we talk about this slide, I just want to add to something that Liam said. Arup's logo was up on one of the slides a couple ago, And I want to call them out because they look at FinOps in a really different way, and I've got a lot of respect for the way that they look at it. They aren't focused on saving money. They aren't focused on getting us to quickly give them some ROI recommendations. What they really have done, and there's a case study in the little download section, but what they really did was focus on making sure that their infrastructure was optimized for cloud, they were using it correctly, and they were focusing on the right areas. And actually the cost savings came with that. Their FinOps strategy was focused a lot more around making sure you were using cloud in the right way, making sure that you were taking those opportunities to do the exciting optimization that you want to do, and refactoring of applications that are proving to be quite expensive just sitting there the way that they are, rather than necessarily just looking at what they have and trying to keep the costs down for what they have. And I think they're a really interesting use case, and there's someone that it's really important for us to talk about. Onto this slide. So I really wanted to just hammer home the fact that if you let FinOps happen without looking at everyone across the business, you kind of miss it, and it kind of never seems to work out. I included these 3 roles because these were 3 of the examples that some of our customers talked to us about. So one, for example, was someone in finance that had tried to implement some kind of cloud cost control, and it just wasn't very successful. The other end was a few developers that I spoke to who were just really frustrated by the impact of policies on them when other people try to sort of, the way they see it, interfere. I think it's really important to make sure that if you're going to do something like this, if you're going to do a project where you look at managing cloud costs, because they really do impact so many people across the business. It's not something that just impacts IT. It's not just one department anymore. It's so many people. And as Liam mentioned, a lot of them are looking at multi-cloud stuff now. You might have everyone on AWS, and then there's one department that decides that they really like GCP, and it makes it really difficult for finance to have a grasp of what's happening, to make sure that you never get to a point where someone feels like they have to make a rash decision, to make sure you never get to the point where your CFO goes, well, I don't like this cloud stuff, it's just costing too much, because you're not able to really articulate where the spend is going, who is spending that money, what they're spending it on, whether or not it's something they should be or shouldn't be. You need to make sure that when you do this, you kind of set it up in the right way to start with. So for our FinOps service, a lot of the onboarding, and it fits into the bespoke reporting that Liam talked about, is making sure that we look at who those key stakeholders are in the business, we look at what their perspective is and what it is that they need, and we make sure that we kind of tick everyone's boxes and we create a good balance that's going to work. And as it changes and as people's requirements change, we make sure that all of that reflects it. So the 3 examples we've got here are your developer who just cares about their application, doesn't really care about how much it's costing. They don't own their own budget. It's not a worry for them. The department head who does have their own budget and is conscious of it, but isn't so worried about everything, can be a bit more hands-on because this is a key part of his role. And then someone in finance manager, director, maybe even the CFO, who is just getting the numbers at the end of the month and has no idea why they keep increasing and what they can do about them and what it's being spent on and whether or not they can do anything about it. I've pulled out 4 different areas that we tend to look at. So one is the idea of dashboards, or anything that they'd want to be able to self-serve look at whenever they wanted to. It tends to be really important closer to the developer end of things. They tend to want to be able to just pull up a dashboard and be able to very quickly look to see what the impact is of some change they've made to an application or a new service that they've taken on board, and how that's impacting things. They tend to only care about it though once the department head is involved and actually looking more regularly. It's that when their department head is able to check in every so often and go, look, I just I've got a little alert saying that your spend's gone through the roof. What is it that's going on? All of a sudden it makes them feel a bit more accountable and feel a bit more proactive to make sure that they're sort of staying within whatever their agreed boundaries are. And the department head, on the other hand, might want to break it down by teams that work for them. It could be teams of developers or engineers. They might want to look at specific applications to look to see what application is the troublemaker if suddenly the spend goes up. And they tend to be more interested in things like reservation utilization. So they might want to quickly have a look. They might want to just put it into reporting. But they tend to want to be a bit more hands-on, looking across the board. Finance, on the other hand, don't really care about that level of granularity around teams or applications. They tend to just want to know where to go when the money gets too high. So we find that they'll tend to look at a business unit or a service line or something along those lines. And as long as they can pull dashboards up on that and go, it looks about right, I don't have to worry about it till the end of the month, they tend to be quite comfortable. Alerting also tends to have to be quite different for all of them. So department heads and finance tend to be very budget focused. Developers, on the other hand, want to know if something has suddenly scaled up horrifically and that they need to quickly jump on the laptop and close it down, or whether or not it's a problem, whether or not it's actually something they were expecting to scale and they don't need to worry about it. If you're a retailer and it's Black Friday and everything scales, you're not going to be surprised if you're trying out some new service around data engineering and you're not comfortable with data engineering and you didn't realize the impact it was going to have on price, and you kind of want to know sooner rather than later because you don't want to come back after the weekend and find that the bill's gone through the roof. Reporting tends to be a little bit different again. So developers might want a view in the middle of the month just to make sure that they're kind of on track, because it gives them time before the end of the month to make any changes or speak to their department head and explain why costs might have gone up. Department heads don't really, from our experience, don't really seem to care so much about getting a fixed report. They tend to just focus a lot on dashboards and having that self-service portal. Finance, on the other hand, want to know what that monthly spend is against budget, and this is a point at which they tend to want it broken down quite heavily. So they want to know which service lines are spending what, who is it that's doing everything. If they find that the cost has suddenly gone up 10% and they've noticed that a lot of it is on DynamoDB, and that's a service that we never really used, they want to know who it is that's using it and who they can go to make sure that, you know, it was all signed off in the right way, whether or not that's a spend that we're going to have to start predicting in future, whether or not it was a one-off, if it was a problem, if there's anything we need to do. It tends to be really important when things suddenly fluctuate to make sure that you've got that granularity. And then from a controls point of view, finance and department heads like them to an extent. Developers don't. It's trying to find the right kind of balance. Finance tends to be all around cost attribution and tagging things, whereas department heads will look at what's in the service catalog, whether or not you can do it, how big can you spin something up, any kind of limits that are in place like that. And it really is a case of, you can't go online and have a recommended, you know, these are the policies and controls we think you should put in, because it differs for every organisation. So we find it's really important to make sure that we go in and we really talk to the people that are in the business and understand what it is that they need. So this is an example, but within your business it could be completely different. It's just really important to make sure that you're talking to everyone, and it isn't just finance who go, we're going to get hold of costs and we're going to sort it out, because it really ends up impacting people like the developers at the other end. We have another poll coming up. This one is, you can see what the question is. I want to, before I have it go live, just call out the fact that I know we've got some people from some of these cloud providers on the webinar at the moment. So if you are from it, please don't vote, because you're going to skew our answers. Everyone else is welcome to go for it. You can pick multiple choices. I think it'd be interesting to find out whether or not people are using multiple. But I'll give it just a second, because it'll impact the recommendations we make on the next slide. Okay. So we actually have, well, you know what? I'm really pleased by the number of GCP users we've got on today. That's a pleasant surprise. I feel like we're talking to more and more people about Azure. And AWS has always been strong for us. It's really good to see that so many of us are still using GCP. Let's move on to the next slide. So we wanted to talk about what people can do next. We planned on doing this FinOps sort of webinar for a while. And I think the impact that COVID has had has kind of created an urgency around it for a lot of people. So we want to talk about some of the things that you can do now, and then Liam's going to talk about that longer term planning and the different sorts of things you can do there. Some of the things that we're going to say here are quite obvious. So turn off any resources that are only used in business hours. You'd be surprised by how much stuff you don't notice is still running when it doesn't need to be running. And a lot of times just going and digging it out and finding out what those things are. Another one is just turning off any resources that you're not going to use. COVID has impacted our customers in really different ways. So we found some have had to scale down operations until everything picks up again. Some have actually just scaled down in areas so they're able to scale up in different ones. So it's really a mix of things. One thing that we're finding is that everyone does have changes that they need to and can be making. So even if it's something really simple, like there's an application that when people were all in the office, or if they're working out of a warehouse or an airport or wherever it is, when people are in, they're really heavy users of a certain application. And once everyone's now working from home and you're having to look at more remote working options and scale up in those areas, you can scale down those applications that people aren't using anymore. So there might be some surprising things that you find that you can turn off or scale down. Scaling in general as well, I think people need to look at sort of where their minimums are. We've found that a lot of stuff can go lower than we initially expected. There's also a conversation we're having with a customer quite recently about the fact that everyone's quite open about the fact that this is having an impact on them. Everyone understands that they need to accept that changes are going to happen. And sometimes you can get away with scaling down because you know it's going to impact performance, you know it's going to impact SLAs. But if they're internal SLAs and you can justify to the business that that cost saving is actually really important, and you know if they have to wait a little bit longer before they can access something that they used to, it's not the end of the world. Sometimes it's really important to start having those conversations. Equally with sort of customer facing things, I think customers are more and more open to the fact that it's more important that everyone sort of supports each other and we get through these periods and everything being quite as quick as it used to be once upon a time. So we're finding that a lot of people are more open to the idea of scaling down where they previously wouldn't, and where it is starting to impact SLAs. The next one is purchasing 1-year reservations with no upfront. So some of the cloud providers, for example, Azure, will allow you to pay monthly for your RIs, and they won't charge you any interest on it. With AWS, for example, it costs a little bit more if you want to spread it out monthly, but Azure, you don't have that problem. So there's no reason why at this point you couldn't still be going in and looking to see where you could get RIs or spot instances or anything like that, and start making those decisions and quickly making those purchases, because it'll very quickly start to impact your sort of overall costs. I think it's really important to make sure you do that turning off and scaling down beforehand though, because you don't want to buy RIs for stuff that you later decide you didn't need as much of. And then the last one is continuing with any cost-saving transformations that you're looking at. So if I mentioned Arup again, they were a really good example of making sure that they put the focus on those transformations. They put the focus on making sure things worked for them. They were building out applications that supported their business and helped drive revenue that were also saving them money. So I think if anyone's planning things like that, it's not necessarily a reason to stop right now. We're finding when we speak to a lot of the cloud providers that still sort of funding available to support people, that they're still really keen to drive this activity. It's not a case of everyone's quieting down and we can stop. It's actually a case of, if you're finding things are a little bit quiet, it's a really good chance to look at some of the stuff that you maybe didn't get time to look at before. Yeah, those are some immediate things you can do. If you've got any other thoughts or questions, just pop some questions. Otherwise, Liam will talk you through stuff you can do longer term.
So yeah, in terms of, I think all of those actions are immediate actions are great, and I think they're absolutely something that we need to keep coming back to on a regular basis. In terms of long-term planning, it's really some of the areas that we've already discussed. It's creating that cross-functional team for cost control, or bringing in a partner. So you're looking at those roles such as finance people, engineering, business analysts. Create that team, and I know some of you on the call already have a FinOps team that are focused on this topic. Create that team, share that responsibility, build up that collaborative knowledge of each other's area, and help collectively drive down that cost. And then agree on that reporting, agree on that governance. What is it each stakeholder needs to see? How often do they need to see it? What structure do you need in place in terms of purchasing decisions, in terms of restricting what services can be used? Have those conversations with a wide range of people in your business, and make sure that you're not going to trip yourself up, or you're not going to leave someone out of that conversation. And then implement those policies. We are in the cloud. We need to automate this away. We need to ensure that the right thing and the most cost-effective thing is the default thing. So making sure that we don't lose any of that agility by implementing our governance, that turning off resources is a scheduled action, a scheduled automated action, that any services that we don't want people to spend without authorization, that those are restricted through service catalogs. Making sure that those notifications and budgets are set in place so that those approval steps can be actioned upon. And then continuous improvement. So as Sandy mentioned there, continuing those transformation efforts, building out that roadmap of transformational activities backed by business cases, such that the engineering effort is in line also with the cloud cost control. And then purchasing additional reservations. So where reservations are available for PaaS services, for storage, expanding on existing compute reservations or committed use discounts or spot instances and those sorts of activities, extending that as you understand more, as you have more visibility, as you're looking at your performance monitoring, as you're looking at your utilization, try and expand the utilization of reservation across your estate. And then this final point is a suitably an interesting one, cost accounting. Now, I am not an accountant. Some of you on the call may be coming from a finance background, but particularly with larger states and larger migration activities, cost accounting really kind of comes into play. So this is being able to potentially capitalize some of your cloud spend. So looking at things like IFRS 16 and ISA 38, you'll be able to talk to your finance teams and look at what services you can potentially capitalize to get it above the line and improve your EBITDA. When we're talking about transformation efforts in the millions, those things can really matter. So I'm not an accountant. I can't give you that advice, but I'm suggesting you go and have those conversations with your finance folks about what benefits that can bring. That's particularly relevant to VM workloads, compute-based PaaS workloads and reservations. We're also starting to see conversations about it for PaaS workloads that are based on open source technologies, because it is something that you can bring back in-house should you need to do that, and therefore it's something you could potentially capitalize. So take that away. It's a little bit of a complicated area. It is as an accounting error, but in this world that we live in, where these things matter, and we do want to focus on that EBITDA, then let's have that conversation as well. And for this, I kind of wanted to sort of summarize really the whole message, which is it doesn't really matter to us what cloud provider that you're on, what cloud provider that you are looking to go to, what your commercial arrangement you currently have or are negotiating on behalf of with 1, 2, 3 or more cloud providers. We have been through every single scenario. We have negotiated with cloud providers on behalf of customers. We have done financial optimization assessments, both for existing customers and for net new customers. We have come across many issues, many of these areas, all of those common mistakes that we spoke about at the beginning, and we've worked with the whole range of those stakeholders to make sure that the cost control is put in place, that the visibility is there, and we can take you on that journey and extend your transformation efforts as well.
So if anyone's looking for any more information, the marketing team has done a really good job at making sure there's loads of stuff available. There should be a little handouts thing, and I don't understand how it works because I've never seen it before, but they've put some handouts in there. So there's a copy of the slides. There are case studies for Funky Pigeon and Arup that we mentioned earlier. Brett King, who's the head of service delivery at Funky Pigeon, actually did a really fun webinar with us talking about how they made those cost savings so quickly. It was like 40% the first year, 25% the second year. And then there's some more information about our consultancy offering Competitive Edge, how our managed service works. FinOps, for example, is considered an optional module that sits within our managed service. So it's something that customers can sort of bring in when they're at that right stage of the journey and then take out when they think they don't need it any longer. They'll also send an email out with a bit of a questionnaire to get an understanding of how you thought this webinar went, if there was anything you wanted more or less of, if there are any other topics that you really want us to cover soon. But otherwise, if there's anything else that you want to talk about, or if you want to just speak to some of our cloud specialists, just give us a call and we'll be able to connect you. And now I think we go on to questions. Okay, so if anyone has any questions, send them through on the questions tab. We have had a few so far. So Liam, I'm going to ask the questions and you can answer them. Deal?
That sounds fine. Yeah.
Okay, so the first one is, what would you say is the biggest challenge for organizations today?
I would say, big question. I would say probably granular cost attribution. So the point I made at the beginning around being able to attribute cost around things such as network charges, egress, generally the sort of air quotes shared costs is quite difficult. And again, even the wider cost attribution of pinning specific costs down to teams is quite difficult still for many organisations. So I'd say that was probably one of the biggest areas that we commonly see as a challenge.
Okay, next one is, how do you handle shadow IT?
Oh wow, culture is how you handle shadow IT. It's an unfortunate thing that comes with the agility of public cloud still, and the ability to spin it up and experiment and do all those good things that we want to do. We still see a lot of shadow IT in organizations. A lot of multi-cloud conversations come off the back of shadow IT, but it's a cultural thing. There are some things that you can do. You can put some network tooling in at the edge of your network, and get some indicators of where things like that might be occurring. But often it's a cultural thing. We've seen a lot of organizations that suspect that they have this problem do an amnesty where they will go out to teams and say, hands up, we know this is a thing. We know you have AWS accounts that are not under control. We know you have GCP projects in an organization that is not centralized. Come to us, let us help you, let us get visibility of it, let us look at some of the governance around it, and they will do that periodically. So they might roll out something like that once a year as a kind of governance exercise to try and kind of rein that in. But it's absolutely a cultural thing.
I think adding to your answer as well, a lot of the time people aren't trying to be sneaky when they do shadow IT. A lot of the time they just don't know that they should be telling you about it. So if anyone off the back of this decides to set up like a working group across the business that looks at cloud costs, it's really important to make sure people know that you're doing it, because a lot of the time they don't know that it's something that anyone's really looking at in particular detail, or that they need to be making sure that their policies are the same way or their accounts are linked in the right way to your accounts. We've got another question. What, if anything, for example, tooling are the cloud providers offering to customers to help them control their costs?
Okay, so there is a lot of native tooling now for managing costs. So there is cost management tooling on all three major cloud providers that will provide you a lot of the dashboards, a lot of that visibility that you want to get, a lot of the recommendations as well, both in some cases AI driven recommendations. So there's cost management in GCP and in Azure, and there's Cost Explorer in AWS. So all of those are native. I think that the key point to some of those is obviously making sure that you are bringing all of those things in centrally, particularly in AWS, that you're pulling all of those costs in under your management account, and you're viewing it from a centralized perspective. in terms of third-party tooling, you know, there are a number of ones out there from a multi-cloud perspective. Cloud Health is the one that Claranet use for our customers. We are a premier partner of Cloud Health, but there are others out there if you're looking from a multi-cloud perspective. Yeah, they all have their benefits and drawbacks, and you know, I could probably take that one offline. But yeah, they are all out there. They all have, you know, similar areas of expertise and focus.
I think tooling is a really good place to start, but I think you also need that expertise. So it's something we talked about in one of the earlier slides. I think it's really important to make sure that you use the tooling to get a view of where you should be looking or what recommendations could be available to you, and then you do that intelligent part of having the right people that really understand the infrastructure go in and see whether or not they make sense and whether or not there's something you should be doing. Last question we've got, so if anyone has any more, send them out, is why not 3-year reservations?
I think that is that's an interesting topic. I said earlier that reservations can get a bit complicated particularly with the 3-year reservations. That's sort of an area where there is more conversation in the organization necessary. So when you're looking at those 3-year RIs, you need to be 100% certain that you're not going to change, deviate, or falter on your commitment on that 3-year. There are use cases for that 3-year. You know, if you have a third-party vendor product that you know is not going to change, that you have a support agreement associated with it that isn't, doesn't have a mid-term roadmap around a SaaS product, or is even a legacy vendor product, then a 3-year RI starts to make sense. So we're starting to see in larger estates a mix of 1 year and 3-year. But most commonly we will always recommend the 1 year, because it's that balance between 20-30% cost saving while also giving you the agility to change your mind and to still focus on that transformation and that refactoring as well. 3-year RIs kind of hamper that slightly. They definitely give you a cost benefit, but they stick you in to that reservation. The other factor is it's about risk management. So when you're purchasing, depending on how you've scoped your reservation, there are reservation options available where you can change your mind in terms of instance types and so on. You can break up some of those at a penalty, but you can break up some of those RIs. But where it sort of is difficult is, you don't really want that commitment, and you're hedging a risk against each cloud provider coming out with a new instance type, a new instance family, a new platform as a service that may be the best thing for that application, and you've committed to 3 years, and therefore you're not going to get the best of that. You're hedging a risk on the cost of that instance type now versus the cost of that machine type or a similar or a different family in the future. And cloud providers are making changes all the time, and it's a risk balance that you've got to make. So you really have to understand the performance of your application, the support agreements, the application itself, and the utilization, all of those things. You've really got to be deeply knowledgeable before you start looking at those 3-year RIs. Sorry, that was a long answer to a simple question.
It's a good answer. It's a fair answer. And to be fair, I'm the one that put 1-year reservations in my section. So I just want to be very clear that we don't have a problem with 3-year reservations, or it just is a case of using them when you need them. And I think now isn't necessarily the time to jump into a rash. Let's just lock it down for 3 years, because the organizations that we're seeing that are really flourishing are changing way faster than every 3 years. Another question is, you mentioned Arup and Funky Pigeon. Do you have an example of an organization on the COVID frontline really pushing their approach to cloud at the moment?
We do. So we're seeing a lot of demand around Windows virtual desktops on Azure. I think the The two biggest things that we're seeing a big push around it at the moment, given the current situation, is around collaboration tools and around virtual desktops for obvious reasons. For a lot of our customers, that means Windows virtual desktops. So we have customers that are deploying that at scale, having conversations to expand that deployment. And it's right now, it's not a cost conversation. Right now, it is a availability conversation. It is a scaling this out conversation. It's about making sure that people can work effectively, and they will want to understand what the cost profile of that is. But it means it's much less meaningful than making sure that staff can work and do their job.
Okay, and also we are out of time. So if anyone has any questions, I'll go back to this slide because it's got the phone number. Feel free to phone. You can contact me or Liam on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever it is that you want. But otherwise, thanks so much for joining. I hope that you found some use out of it, and if whether you did or didn't, please let the marketing team know when they send out a questionnaire.
Thank you.